Okay, so I'm going to try a new kind of loaf with additions. So I'm doing a 75% hydration white loaf, and I'm going to do a savory loaf with insane amounts of garlic, a little bit of rosemary. I can add more later on future loaves. This is fresh from my garden. And then I'm going to put some cool stuff in it. I'm going to put some pine nuts and some pistachios and some sunflower seeds, and I might even put a little bit of chia seed in there. So this will be kind of a nut and seed loaf with lots and lots and lots of garlic. The garlic, how I'm going to prepare it, I've tried getting roasted garlic at the grocery store, at the deli counter. And it mushes into the dough, which makes the dough behave strangely. I just don't have the skill yet to use it that way. So what I'm going to do is I've peeled all of my garlic. I'm going to chop it, loosely chop it, and then I'm going to flash it into hot oil for just 45 seconds or a minute, just enough for the outside to start getting crispy and golden, not brown, but crispy and golden. And once I've done that, I can put that in the loaf. And I think that it'll keep a little bit of that crunch, but it won't mush out. That's my goal. So we are going to start out with the garlic. So a few other things about this bread project. I usually start my starter and my autolyse the night before. And then in the morning, first thing, I can build my dough with the starter. The starter's raised overnight and gotten active. And then I can do all my fold and stretches, incorporations, and it can do its bulk fermentation. And then I'm shaping it by the evening. And for that to happen, I want to keep the temperature of the dough a little bit higher, 75, 6, 7, 8 degrees, even as high as 80, which I do in my oven with the light on in there. So that way I can do all the building of the dough, all the stretching, folding, building out of the strength of the dough, and the bulk fermentation all in one day, and then it can sit in the refrigerator for the cold proof overnight. Well, today I didn't do that. I didn't start my starter until early afternoon. So I've done a few things to adapt to that, or I'm going to attempt a few things to adapt, because dough is really forgiving, and the length of time that it takes to bulk ferment to get to the fermentation level that it needs to get to is really a function of the temperature of the dough, right? So if the dough is really warm when you put it in the refrigerator, the time that it takes to get from that really warm 80-degree dough down to the temperature of my refrigerator, it's still rising and fermenting that whole time. Versus if I put it into the refrigerator at 70 degrees, it's still going to be rising, but that'll be a shorter period of time. So I compensate that for that phenomena by, if I've got 80-degree dough, I only let it rise like to 30% of its size, because I know it's going to continue to rise in ferment in the refrigerator while the dough itself cools down. So this time I'm doing a little bit of reverse voodoo on that, because I'm not going to wait up all night for this thing to bulk ferment before I shape it and put it in the refrigerator, and I don't want it to over ferment, or I'll have dough that's too sticky and where the structure has started to collapse again. So this is what I'm trying first attempt. I put my starter, I fed it about 11 a.m. and I actually put it on the back porch where it was 80 degrees so that it would rise really quickly. And it's about 7 o'clock now. It's done, so it's ready for me to turn into a dough anytime. but I want to be able to build out and do all the stretch and folds, but let it do its bulk fermentation overnight on my counter, which means I want that dough to be much cooler, because the cooler the dough is, the slower the fermentation happens, that bulk fermentation. So I am going to take all of the garlic that I just chopped up and a little bit of the rosemary that I chopped up fresh from the garden. Oh, smells really good. And I'm going to saute these for just a few minutes in hot oil. And I want them to cool completely before I incorporate them in the dough, because I don't want to do anything that's going to elevate the temperature of that dough, since I want it to have slow fermentation overnight before I get to it, do its final shaping, and get it in the refrigerator for its cold proof. So that's the strategy. Knock wood. We'll see if it works. I'll see you at the stove for some sauteing of the garlic. Okay, so I've had this cooking for about 4 minutes, and I think it's getting very close. You can see around the edges it's really cooked. And I think the sweet spot in between where it's got just a little bit of that crisp and it's too burnt is going to be really easy to cross. So now I've been standing here the whole time, but now I'm really going to watch it. You can see it's getting golden brown, just the beginning of golden brown. And I don't want it to be little hard crunches in the bread. I want it to be little bursts of garlic, but also ones that hold their shape in the loaf while I'm doing all of the folding and stretching and such. Okay, so I'm going to build out this dough now. Now remember, I want the temperature of this dough to be lower than usual because I want to slow down the fermentation so that it doesn't overproof while I sleep, especially with all the yummy stuff I'm putting in it. So I am going to really watch the temperature on this. I've had the dough, the pre-dough in auto-lees for a few hours. I'm going to just test. And this has been sitting out and our air conditioner is on, so let's see if it's got any. That's wonderful. That's sitting at about 70 degrees, which is about what the temperature of the house is. So I know that my starter is probably sitting at around 80 degrees because it's been outside. It's even warmer than that. It's 101. So I'm putting about 20 grams more water into this. Guess what? I'm gonna cool that down with some ice cubes. Yeah, baby, to compensate for the 200 grams of warm starter I'm gonna put in here. This is officially mad scientist shit we're doing right now. Not tried any of this stuff. So I've got my trusty little scale, my auto-lees. I'm going to zero out the scale. All right, and I'm going to put 200 grams of starter in here, which will be most of this. Look at that, 182. $190, $197. Pretty darn good. $199, $200, right on the button. And the rest of this, very little, just goes in my fridge until I'm ready to use it again. And then I feed it and start again. None of this feeding daily stuff for Roxanne. I don't know if it's better or not to do it that way, but I know I won't do it that way. And so far, the dough has forgiven me for that laziness. All right, so I've got 200 grams of starter. I'm gonna zero out my scale. And I'm gonna put in 24 grams of salt. That's 12 for each loaf. Pull some of it back out. It says 27 grams of salt. Let's try a few more little pinches. Alright, that's as low as it's going to get. But a little bit more salt actually slows down the proofing, so we're in serious mad scientist realm. And now I've got this cold water. Let's see what those ice cubes did. That brought my water down to 54 degrees rather than the 70 that it would be, which is room temperature. Zero this out and put in 20 grams of water. Exactly. All right. Now I'm going to fold this up and then slap it for 6 to 8 minutes, and we'll have us some dough. You see how nice and smooth that is? It feels smooth. I can't feel any of the graininess from the salt, right? And now I'm going to put this in its pot again, and I'm not going to incorporate the additions, the garlic and the nuts and such and seeds, until the second stretch and fold. So I'll see you in a half hour. So that garlic turned into about 2 cups. I want about 3 cups of goodies. A little bit more maybe. So here I've got sunflower seeds. And I'm going to put maybe a 1/4 cup of those. More like a 1/2 cup. some pine nuts. That gets me to 3 cups. So I got 2 cups of garlic, half a cup of sunflower seed, half a cup of pine nuts. And I'm going to do half a cup of pistachios. This could be a packed loaf. There we go. Okay, so I folded in all the goodies on the second stretch and fold. And now I'm to coil folds. And this is the last one, so I've done 3 of them already. And I use just a little crayon marker or something to just put a mark, and you know, you can't get it perfect, but I'm going to mark it where the dough meets the side of this plastic. This washes off. And remember, I'm doing an experiment that I'm going to see if I can go to sleep and if I have slowed the process of fermentation enough that it doesn't overproof while I sleep. So I'm going to put this here. And I'm going to see what the temperature of this dough is. Good, it's like 71 degrees. If this stays at around 70 overnight, it'll probably take 8 or 10 hours to ferment. And since I'm going to be putting it in the fridge for the cold fermentation at a lower temperature, I can afford to let this dough rise a little bit higher than I usually do. Look at that little piece of garlic. It's just sitting right there. I better do this. That doesn't suck at all. I'm one of those people who eats cookie dough before I actually put it in the oven. It's a miracle that any of it ever gets to the oven. I'm doing the same thing with little garlic bits. So now that I've marked this, I'm going to do a final set of coil folds. I find it's easier to work on if it's on my bench. So I'm going to use a little bit of water. Then I put a little bit of water on my hands and loosen the dough from the side and dump it out onto my bench. It's already doing, look at how clean that is. So the fermentation has begun and it's doing what it needs to. So my coil folds, wetting my hands so that this dough doesn't stick to them. And I'm gonna tuck my hands underneath here, kind of fold this underneath and do this several times. This dough has already got some nice structure to it. And I think that's good enough. I'll put this back in here. I always mark this before I do my coil and folds, because as you can see, this is all tightly bound now, and it's going to ease out as it continues to ferment, but I just get a more accurate reading if I mark it before, Like on this one, when I marked it before doing all the folds, you can see that it's kind of spread out in the bowl. Little pro tip with this, wet my hands, loosen the dough. Dump it out. Look at that, baby. Look at how clean that is. Yeah. Wet my hands again. And then start folding it in on itself. This builds structure. A lot of the people I see on YouTube talk about just doing this a few times. At higher altitude like I'm at, it takes a little bit more of this to build structure in. So I just do it until I feel like the dough is fighting me. And that's about this point. Like I'm not going to get much more out of that. So I'm going to put this in here, fold it over a final time. I'm going to cover these. It is 11 o'clock now. I will be getting it up at around 7. So hopefully when I get up at 7, that 8 hours won't have been too much time because I've got the temperature of the dough low. So we will see. My goal at this is not that it fully doubles, but I want to get it to about 80% up, almost double from where it was. Then I'll do a final shape and stick it in for the cold proof. And then this can be baked either tomorrow night or Wednesday morning, the following morning. So, okay, so it's 9 a.m. and we're going to take a look at the bulk fermentation, see how it's done overnight. Like I said, dough is very, very forgiving, right? All the stuff that really determines the success or failure of a loaf happens in the time that you've got that active bulk fermentation. That starts at the moment you build the dough with the starter in it. And that starter can start eating everything inside the dough. And as it's eating it, it's creating gas and bubbles. And you're stretching and folding and coiling to build enough structure in the bread that it can hold in all those bubbles. And that's what gives you, that's your leavening agent. That's what gives you a rise, right? When I say success or failure, I have yet to really fail at a loaf. I've got some that it didn't rise as much as they should have because they were a little bit overproofed, right? But you take a look online and you can see some just miserable failures, right? Where the whole thing is a pancake because it was so overproofed that no gas could be held in anymore by the structure of the dough because the bacteria started eating that structure away, right? So I've never had a flat loaf, but I have had some that were kind of dense little guys. But guess what? It's homemade sourdough bread. It's still delicious. It's still a very appropriate butter delivery system, right? But one of the reasons as I've been baking sourdough that I do it a couple of times a week is that I want to see what works, what doesn't work, and more importantly, how I can fit it into my lifestyle, right? I'm talking about this process as I'm doing it on these videos. And you see, my total time involvement is less than 45 minutes if you just look at the actual time that my hands are on something in the kitchen. And when I'm doing loaves that don't involve additions like I did with seeds or with fruit, my total hands-on dough involvement is 20 minutes, right? Half hour tops. So knowing that this bulk fermentation period, the period between the time we put the starter and build the dough out. The starter hits the flour. And the time we put it into the refrigerator for that cold fermentation, for that cold proof, that's where the success is going to happen. And the experiment I did on this last night of having a cooler dough so that it would sit out all night and not over ferment, because that over ferment, that over proofing is what would cause it to pancake. That would be the only real failure that I could see in making the sourdough. I found online this fantastic little chart here. This is called the Sourdough Journey Ultimate Sourdough Bulk Fermentation Guide. If you just go the Sourdough Journey, you'll find a PDF that you can download. And what I love about this, you've got a little chart over here, right? And it gives you, if the dough is 71 degrees like it was last night when we went to bed, this chart says it'll take 11 hours, right? The times itself are of less importance than the next column, which is the target rate rise. That is when I say I'm hoping that I want the dough to rise 70% before I put it in the refrigerator, because it's going to continue rising that additional 30% as the refrigerator cools the dough down and slows or stops that fermentation process. This is what I'm using to determine that. The hours, if the default is how much it's rising, right? And there are going to be different factors that impact how long it takes. But this gives me an idea. Looking at this thing where it says 71 degrees would take about 11 hours to get to 70% rise in the dough, which is what my target was. I can show you after, it's 9 a.m. now, I went to bed at 11, so that's 10 hours, right? And you can see this one, if you take a look at our line here, I'd say that's about a 70% rise. I think this loaf is ready for me to shape. If I take a look at this one, same counter sitting right next to it, it has not risen as much as the first one, right? So even the positioning of it, maybe this one was a few inches closer to the stove, or the one that raised up was a little bit warmer. Maybe this one was a little bit cooler because it was closer to the AC vent. Who knows, right? So there can be that much variation. So the actual hours, in this case 10 hours, was adequate for one loaf at 71 degrees to get to the target rise. This one may take another hour, right? So the hours are less important than what I'm after, which is the target percentage rise for the temperature of the dough, right? So this is a very helpful chart, and the timing just lets me ask, do I dare go to bed and not be watching this dough overnight with all the effort I put into it, with all my golden brown chopped garlic and fresh rosemary? Wow, well, this tells me at 71 degrees, I should have in the ballpark of 11 hours. I'm going to be sleeping for 7. Okay, I got enough time. I'm going to risk this. And now that I've done this experiment, I see that worked quite well. So I'm going to go ahead and shape the first loaf, and we're going to let the second one sit on the counter for another hour probably, and see if it raises a little bit more as well. So there's another thing that I do, and I am not an expert. I've been doing this for a few months, right? I'm just giving you what my experiences have been. When people build the dough together and it ferments together, you've only got one container that you're tracking how much it's raised, right? It's more consistent. And then you see bakers who kind of chop off pieces and weigh them, and then do what's called a pre-shaping, where they pull that together, build some tension, and let it sit on the counter for a few minutes, maybe a half hour, and then do the final shaping. I have found that my hands aren't skilled enough. When I do that, when I cut it open and then try to do the pre-shape, I let out some of the gas. I don't get as good a result. So you see, I've split these into 2 doughs earlier in the process. So at the end, I don't need to pre-shape this at all. I'm just going to do a final shaping on it, and that way I've got a better chance of keeping all of the gas in there and getting the outcome that I want to do. So I'm going to go get some flour. Now you saw throughout all this stretching and folding and manipulating of the dough, I never used any flour, right? Which is what we often do in baking. If it's too sticky, we either add a little bit of flour to it or we flour our hands. I instead watered my hands, watered the counter, so that I wouldn't be adding more flour to the dough and messing with the hydration rate. The only time that I'm using actual flour is in this final shaping. So I'm going to put a little bit of flour on the counter and spread it out. Let's see which of these is my big one. This is my big one. And if you think of the top of this now, I'm going to dump this over. Oh God, does that smell good. And this will become the bottom, the non-sticky floured bottom, right? So I'm going to also put a little bit of flour on the top of this right in here, because I don't want this sticking to my workspace. I loosen it from the edges, especially I find that when I've got inclusions in it, it's denser, it sticks to the bottom. See, there we go. Oh, baby. So this, I've got a nice clean. The reason I'm pointing that out is because if it were overproofed or underproofed, that might be sticking to the sides more. So now I got this glob, right? I'm going to spread it out just a little bit. I want to be very gentle with the dough because I don't want to be letting go all of that gas. I find when you've got inclusions, there are more natural tears in this dough, like you can see that there, because the nut, the garlic, the whatever it is, kind of acts as an internal knife that cuts it open. But I'm spreading this out a little bit. Nice structure there. And I'm going to fold the bottom up. There's a bunch of different methods. Whichever one works the best for you. I found this one the easiest. So I folded that up, and then I stretch this out a little bit. This final shaping is about building as much tension as I can into this dough. And then I pull this one out a little bit, more tension, fold it over, and then I'm going to take these sides and stitch them. So I pull that over, kind of pinch it together. I'm going to pull this over and another one from the side. Because I've got all these inclusions, all this garlic, it's a little hard to handle, and I'm trying not to tear the dough, though some tearing is happening. I'm going to do a few more stitches, maybe here. Then I'm taking it from here, another little gentle stretch, and I'm folding it over and getting it onto its butt, as it were. Right? So now, the sides are still open. I'm gonna pinch these together, and I move fast, right? Because this dough is still sticky. I heard somebody describe it as touching a hot pot. If you touch it faster, that's why I go like this when I'm touching the lid of a stove before I take it off. So I'm moving fast to pinch these together. All right. And I'm going to be putting these into a banneton. So some people spritz these down in a little spray bottle. I just hose it down, let it sit and it's partially dry, but it's a little damp in there. And now when I put some rice flour into the sides, it'll stick to that dampness. Everything I'm reading says use rice flour because I don't know why. I think this is Dr. Science stuff. I haven't researched it. that maybe it creates less gluten or no gluten. I don't know, but for some reason the dough is less likely to stick to rice flour than to regular flour. So, not in all things, but in this I'm doing what I'm told. Hey, that was me hissing at the cat. All right, so now I've got this floured, and I want to get this into kind of a loaf shape and build tension. You see, this has got some tension from what I just did, but not as much as I want. And I'm going to just pull this and tuck it under and try to make it more into a loaf shape. If I need more flour, I can put it. But this is building that tension in as much as I can. I'm going to turn it upside down, flour side down, sticky side up. There we go. And you see my stitches are already coming apart. That's okay. I'm going to let this sit out for a few minutes and relax, and then come in and do a final stitching. This loaf has been sitting here since I shaped it for about 20 minutes. So the dough loosens up a little bit and I can do kind of the final stitching. So I pull these over each other and pinch them together. Pinch them together. I move quick. This is creating a final bit of tension along the sides. I've seen a lot of people handle the ends differently. It doesn't have to be pretty as long as it's kind of stitched together so that this is really about that tension makes it rise, and when you score it, when you put a cut across it, that tells it where to rise so that it doesn't just blow out. And if I don't have this well stitched together, it may decide that that is a place to blow out instead of where I cut it. So this now is stitched together. I'm going to cover it with a shower cap. I'm going to put a little bit of flour on here. I'm putting rice flour on again. And this is going to go in the refrigerator. I think I may leave it, well, we'll see. I'll either bake it tonight or I'll bake it in the morning. Okay. I think because this did such a long proofing, everything I read says that's where a lot of the flavor development happens. I don't know why. So I'm going to flour the top of this. A little bit more flour here. Loosen the sides of this. Dump it out. I don't find I have to loosen the sides if I don't have additions in here. That somehow makes the whole dough denser and hold on more. That looks beautiful. Look at that. So I'm going to gently spread this out into a square. Careful not to let that gas out or puncture it or be too rough. All right, so now I got a rough square. Fold the bottom up and over. Tap that down. Pull this out. More tension. Fold that over. Fold this one over. Attach that. This here. And then stitch it. Stitch. Crisscross pinch. Crisscross pinch. Crisscross pinch.
That's not holding on too good. That's not holding on too good. These inclusions make this process a little bit less predictable. So there's always this kind of discussion with myself. When is good enough? The more I manipulate the dough at this moment, the more I deflate it, which I don't want to do. So now I'm going to kind of stretch this, roll it in on itself and over. Now I've got this glump. I'm going to try to stitch together, pinch together these bottoms, these sides. And then build some tension. Tuck and pull, tuck and pull, tuck and pull. There's all kinds of methods. I've tried several of them. This I'm finding, since I mostly make loaves anymore, not the rounds, this method works pretty good. Got a little bit of escape ends. I'm going to pinch that together. I just kind of pulled it up. Let's do some more tucking, some more pulling. I already floured this with rice flour. I'm going to let this sit for about 10 minutes just to rest and get a little gooey again. Do the final stitch on this and put it in the fridge. You never really know until you bake it what you got, but this loaf raised. It raised to more than 60%. It did so overnight, so that part of the equation succeeded. We'll see how it does in the fridge. Okay, so my garlic loaves just came out. I let them cold ferment for about 24 hours just because I wasn't going to bake them last night. And they came up a little dense. You see, they didn't rise as much as my loaves usually do. They look beautiful. Look at that. I put some little scoring on it. It did rise a little. There's an ear, we call that, but the whole thing is a little dense. I did a little bit of research on it, and apparently garlic, because it's got natural antibiotic characteristics, properties, that's what I'm looking for, properties, that can actually slow down the bulk fermentation or even stop it, which is consistent with what these loaves look like. So I'll have to play around with maybe less garlic, maybe cooked a little bit more so that slows down. We'll see, but I would call this mediocre outcome. I'll let you know how they taste. Okay, so I just tasted it, and I'd say this is my first official fail. What was wrong with this loaf? Too much garlic. That not only impeded the bulk fermentation, but it was also just too much garlic, which is a rare state. Very seldom does one put too much garlic. So too much garlic, a little too much salt. The flavor was off, and I think the pine nuts didn't work. So I'm going to turn around and try this loaf again with half the garlic, with more sunflower seeds. I think no pistachios, just simple it down to sunflower seeds, garlic, and rosemary. And we'll see what happens. So stay tuned.